Let's get into image scanning. If you're going to use a scanner in the Mac lab, you have to make sure that you are sitting at a computer where the scanner is hooked into. So there's one hooked up to the teaching station, and then there is another larger scanner at the front of the Mac lab by the projection screen hooked up to a computer there. So unfortunately, you can't scan remotely in the lab. You have to be physically sitting directly at one of those computers where the scanner is plugged in. And once you are there, make sure the scanner is turned on. You can lift the lid, place your image front side down onto the glass, close the lid, and then you're ready to launch the Epson software. You'll find this under Applications. Scroll down to Epson software, and then this is what you want, the Epson Scan 2 icon. When it opens up, it'll look something like this. You'll hit preview in order to get a preview image of what is on the scanner bed, and you can see that I have a piece of scrapbooking paper here. It's about 8 by 10 inches, so it's a little smaller than the size of the scanning bed itself. What I'm going to do is just take my selection tool here that will appear when you hover over the work area, and I'm just going to click and drag to select the area that I actually want to scan and save. It basically saves me an extra step later on from having to crop out the extra white stuff later on in Photoshop. You can resize your selection by hovering over the marching ants and then clicking and dragging. Okay, and if you mess up, you can always hit the erase button over here too to start from scratch again. So I'm going to start over here, make sure I have my selection. Before I hit scan, I'm going to make sure that I have a few things set up correctly. The first thing is to make sure that my resolution is at 300 dpi, okay, for print quality. Then under image format, I'm just going to save this as a JPEG. You can label your file here if you would like by clicking on this drop-down menu and going to settings. I can call this flower pattern. Hit OK. And here's where you can save it to your drive. So under folder, you can go to select. It'll bring up a Finder window where you can choose your drive and make sure it gets saved onto there. I'm just going to save this onto my desktop for demo purposes. Then I am going to hit scan. It should only take a few moments. The higher the image resolution, the longer the scanning is going to take. Once this is done, I will open it up in Photoshop so that we can check the overall image size and make sure that everything imported okay. There it is. Open this in Photoshop. I'm going into image size. You can see it's almost 8 by 10 at 300 pixels per inch. That's perfect. So if you want to bring something in at 100% scale, scan it in at 300 pixels per inch. Now, what do you want to do though if, let's say, you want to take a detail area of this, maybe it's a sketch or a smaller object, and you want to make it larger? The trick to this is to take the number of times you want to enlarge the image and then multiply that by 300. So let's say I only need a small part of this image, okay? Now, if I scan it in at 300 pixels per inch as is, you can see that this square is only about 2.5 by 2.5 inches. But if I wanted to make this larger so that it appears larger on my artboard, on my 8 by 10 artboard, then I can double or triple the effective resolution. So if I want this to be 3 times larger, I'm going to take 300, multiply that by 3, and scan it in at 900 dpi. If I wanted it twice the size, I would scan it in at 600 dpi. If I wanted it 4 times the size, it would be 1200 dpi. So you get where I'm going here. Okay, before I hit scan, I'm going to rename this. Just call it flower detail. You can also use a file counter if you're scanning multiple images that you want with the same name, but just, you know, a different number following the extension. Hit OK. And then I will hit scan. Now, what's going to happen is it's going to take longer to scan because it's really packing a lot of pixels into your selected area. And once that's done, now let's take a look at this in Photoshop. We'll go into image, image size. Sure, it's only 2.5 by 2.5, but we are still at 900 pixels per inch. I'm going to do that trick that I showed you guys in class last time where I uncheck resample image, put my resolution at 300 pixels per inch, and you can see that that enlarged my overall dimensions. So that is the proper way to enlarge an image. It works great if you're going to be scanning photos, imagery out of magazines or newspapers. If you're scanning fabric or any other kind of texture, this is what I would recommend. If you're not sure what size you're going to need by the time you get into your Photoshop project, I always say to you know, go on the safe side and put more pixels in than fewer, okay? Because otherwise, if you try to stretch out a small image, it's going to lose image quality and it'll start looking pixelated, right? And we don't want that to happen. So that is the trick with scanning. And then from here, you know, I can just work as usual. Bring up my artboard. Let's just pretend I've got a blank 8x10 artboard here. Bring my flower detail over, take my move tool, click and drag it over, and I can work, keep working. Now, if I wanted this to be even larger, then what I would have to do is go back and scan this in at 1200 DPI or whatever. Or if I knew that I was just going to extract part of this, remember your selection tools. Let me see, go into here. I could just select, maybe it's this flower that I want, and then one over here. Let me add to my selection. Trying to go over all these little holes right here. I'm going to remove some of this area right in the center. Okay. And now if I hit delete, it's not actually going to delete the background, right? It's going to delete my flowers. So I'm going to Command Z to undo that. And I'm going to go to select inverse. Okay, so now you can see the marching ants are around my flowers, but also the outer edge of the border. That means that it selected everything around my flowers. So when I hit delete, now that is gone. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect so I can move on. And then I can come in here, do an image transform, you know, move and rotate everything around, etc. You can see I didn't select everything that was showing on my artboard. So what you could do from here is create a layer mask. We've already gone over this. Hit your paintbrush tool, paint with black, make sure my opacity is up to 100%, and just go over this to remove it. Make sure I don't take part of my flower here when I'm erasing. And I can see when I zoom in that some of my edges are a little rough, so I can come in here with my paintbrush and a fairly soft edge to clean some of this up. So it's a little time consuming. I also could have used that refine edge option that we talked about before when you're making your selections, but I got into a little bit of a rush, and I won't sit here and make you guys watch me do all of this, but this is just for review purposes so that you know how you can combine tools and techniques to get an extraction or a selection exactly the way you want it. Okay. All right, so that is the basics to scanning, and I will move on now to the next lecture.